The following program contains recreations of actual events. Tonight, these true stories. A railroad nightmare. A runaway train with deadly explosive gas rolls backwards down the tracks. It's a race against time to stop it. An American flees Kuwait, Iraqi troops searching for him. At the border, he's taken hostage. Only a young girl can save him. A man ends up hitching a ride in what turns out to be his very own stolen car. But can he prove it? Against all odds. Ladies and gentlemen, Lindsay Wagner and Everett McGill.
Good evening and welcome to the show.
Tonight you're about to see a truly remarkable display of courage, confidence, and coincidence. You'll meet several people who demonstrate that beating the odds, no matter how great, often requires a timely combination of all three.
Without a doubt, one of the worst fears of anyone who works the railroad is the nightmare of a runaway train. When it happens, as you'll see, it's a race against time to ward off catastrophe. It was the longest train anyone could remember leaving Stockton, California. 140 cars, nearly 2 miles long. After riding 10 straight hours, the four-man crew stopped for coffee near a little town of Escalon, leaving the train and its deadly cargo, 1,200 tons of LPG, liquid petroleum gas, alone on the tracks.
We figured we were in the store for about 7 minutes. And then we walked out, and I was the first one to come out. And then all of a sudden, my fireman comes running by me, and I said, "Where are you going?" He said, "The train is rolling out of town." And it looked to me like the headlight was a little further back than I'd remembered walking, but I thought, well, with 140 cars, I figured that some of the cars had just rolled out from the slack action, and it'd roll back a little ways, and he'd catch it no problem. So I'm just kind of walking faster and chewing on my tuna sandwich and downing my milk. I mean, I'm hungry. That's the main thing on my mind at this point. So I'm sort of jogging, thinking, there'll be no problem here. After about 3/4 to a mile, I saw my fireman laying in the ballast. He'd given all that he could, and he had collapsed against the rail.
Gotta stop the train.
And all he said to me was, "Catch the train." And then I realized, this is a serious emergency we have here.
Liquid petroleum gas is extremely flammable. An accident could easily set off a deadly explosion and fire.
After running about 1/4 of a mile, I realized that the headlight was getting further away from me. And I'm thinking to myself, this train is going way too fast. I can't run another inch. But I know from having remembered on the radio, there's a train sitting on the main line at Stockton. We have explosives and LPG gas, and we have a situation that could be a potential catastrophe. If I don't catch this train at this point, there's a bad situation waiting to develop down the road.
Exhausted, Terry realized he could never catch the train on foot. When he saw the lights of a farmhouse nearby, he decided to get help.
Hello? Hello, I need some help. Anybody in there?
At 1 in the morning, Denise Powell awoke to find a desperate stranger pounding on her door.
Train on the main line. I'm a locomotive engineer. We're gonna have a
She naturally doesn't trust me at all. She's not opening the door.
Phone calls.
Do you guys have ID?
I don't have any ID. I'm not
At this
joking.
point, I don't have any identification with me. And I still can't convince her that this is a real
I don't have
emergency.
any numbers. Call the railroad. Call railroad emergency services.
Just then, Denise's husband, Keith, shouted for Terry to hop in his truck. Keith had suspected trouble when he noticed the train rolling by. When he heard Terry pounding at the door, he put two and two together, got dressed, and put his truck in gear. The runaway train had already rolled another mile down the track. Stockton and impending disaster was now only 13 miles away. The two men raced alongside, trying to catch up and overtake the train. Ten minutes later, they came to a railroad crossing. Terry feared this would be his last chance to stop the train.
It's just clicking by like this. I'm so exhausted I can't even get the door open. My arms feel like they're just made out of rubber. I literally can't lift them to open the door. He has to reach across me to open the door. He throws open the door and says, "Catch that train." So I go up to the road crossing. I know I've only got 30 or 40 feet of pavement to run across because on either side of that is nothing but rocks and mud where I've got no footing. So when the engines are getting closer to me as they're rolling my direction, I start running. If at that moment I had lost my grip, I would have been cut in half. I've got to pull myself up on this top step, or I'm going to either go under this engine or I'm going to fall off, and there's no chance that anybody else can catch this thing.
He made his way to the controls and pulled the emergency brake. The chase was over. Terry had stopped the runaway train.
It was a miracle to me that I ever made it that far, and it was just a great relief to me that I was able to bring the thing to a stop.
We're secure.
Terry notified his dispatcher that the emergency was under control, and by dawn, the train made its way safely to Fresno.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the man who finally caught the train and his breath, Terry Easley.
In a moment, we'll be back with the story of an American who refused to be taken hostage during the war in Kuwait.
They saved my life. I wouldn't be here today, probably, if it hadn't been for them.
August 2nd, 1990. 100,000 heavily armed Iraqi troops storm into Kuwait. In less than a day, the tiny nation of 2 million is captured. Many are brutally slaughtered. In the next 72 hours, hundreds of thousands attempt to flee to the Saudi Arabian border. At the heavily armed checkpoints, most are turned back. Reports quickly spread that Saddam Hussein's secret police are rounding up foreigners, holding them hostage, and hanging anyone who helps them. This was the predicament that confronted a soft-spoken 46-year-old American. Richard Clay, an electrical engineer from Indiana, had spent 4 years in Kuwait working for an oil company, supervising a staff of 500 employees.
After the war erupted, Richard was told that Iraqi guards had already been to his office searching for him. Fearing for his life, he went into hiding. An innocent man caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. For 3 weeks, Richard hid in several apartments in Kuwait City. His only link to the outside world was a group of workers from the Philippines concerned about his safety. They brought him food and news of the widespread devastation. Desperate to avoid being taken hostage, Richard decided to escape.
I know a lot about the hostage situation that went on in Lebanon, and to me it was worth risking my life rather than being taken hostage, because I understand, what happens to hostages.
The Filipinos told him that they were free to leave Kuwait using transit documents they had obtained from their embassy.
Some blank documents.
I'd seen one of these Filipino travel documents. I said, get me one of these, see if you can buy one, steal one, whatever. They couldn't get one, but they brought back some blanks.
For 10 days, working with crude equipment, Richard's friends carved out an official stamp from a rubber shower sandal. Time and again, they failed to duplicate the embassy ink until they discovered that by adding milk, they had a perfect match. The documents were complete. Richard Clay, Hoosier from Bloomington, became Ricardo Erazo Clay from Batangas City, the Philippines.
A couple of the Filipinos who were with me, they said that they knew where there were 5 or 6 buses, so I told them to go steal one.
August 28th, Richard and 36 of his co-workers climbed aboard a stolen bus and began their escape. The border to Saudi Arabia was too dangerous. Their only route was across Iraq, right through Baghdad, and onto the neutral zone between Iraq and Jordan.
Getting out of Kuwait, of course, we've seen burnout tanks, burnout automobiles on the side of the road, but the roads were just filled with Iraqis.
At the first checkpoint, soldiers demanded all the Filipinos' transit documents. Mixed with the others, Richard's forged papers deceived the Iraqi border guards. August 31st, 3 days later. After 900 miles and 100-degree heat, Richard reached the Iraqi border to Jordan. Unlike previous checkpoints, at this one, an Iraqi guard boarded the bus.
Everybody hold the documents in the air.
When he arrived to me, he took the travel document away. He looked at the travel document, looked at me.
Come with me. What's the problem? Get off the bus now!
I said, I'm trying to go to Jordan. All I want to do is go home. He said, get off the bus. Just took me by the arm, and took me into the border shack, which was a little porta camp. Told me to go in the back room where they threw all their garbage. He pushed me down onto my knees and told me to put my hands behind my head. I did that.
Are you an American?
No, sir, I'm not.
You are a Marine.
No, I'm not a Marine.
He said, Americans, we can kill Americans for trying to escape. He says, if I kill you, he said, nobody'd even know it. I says, well, I'm not American. I said, I'm Filipino. I says, if you want to kill me, I says, you can do that, but send my body back to the Philippine embassy, because I don't want to be buried in your country.
Don't be a giant!
Outside, Richard's friends boldly fought for his release.
Ricardo's coming with us, so we don't go.
The Filipinos spread their luggage across the road. They blocked all traffic. They would not leave without their friend. 4 hours passed. A Filipino girl named Libby entered the hut to beg for Richard's release. She claimed that he was her uncle.
He supports the whole family.
We'll just ask him a few questions.
Please let him go.
She was a very good-looking little girl.
The whole family.
He kind of shined up to her, and he became very attached to her.
Another 40 minutes went by, and Libby was able to persuade the guard to let her bring Richard some food. And with it, a note.
The Iraqis, they had a machine gun right at the guard post there. And a lot of the Filipinos were milling around this machine gun emplacement. And I read this note, and they said if I wasn't out there, you know, within the next hour, that they were going to take that machine gun and get me out of there. You know, I ate the note, you know, with the food, and I told Libby, or, you know, nodded at her and told her, you know, not to do that. Well, he was romancing Libby there for about an hour. He really wasn't paying much attention to me, but he was having fun, trying to get, you know, some kind of address or something, like he was going to be able to see her sometime, maybe in the Philippines or something.
Richard was interrogated by 3 other guards. Then he was left alone. The Filipinos refused to leave the checkpoint. Libby continued to plead for Richard's release. The situation had reached a stalemate.
About an hour later, the border guard took me out of the port camp, came over and he gave Libby my travel document and smiled kind of sarcastically.
Goodbye, Marine.
Goodbye.
After 6 hours of interrogation, Richard and his companions crossed into the neutral zone and freedom.
Well, the Filipinos had helped me escape. You know, there isn't anything I wouldn't do for them. You know, I mean, they saved my life. You know, I wouldn't be here today, probably, if it hadn't been for them.
Immediately following his ordeal, Richard could have returned to his home in Indiana. Instead, he remained in Jordan long enough to help 60 of his friends and fellow workers escape.
Coming up now, a totally different kind of story. Imagine hailing a ride in a taxi, only to discover it is your own stolen car. You ever have that awful feeling of walking outside to discover your car has been stolen? Well, sadly, the odds are you'll never see it again.
But here's a man who not only saw his car again, he actually hitched a ride in it.
27-year-old security guard Bogdan Satella was taking the bus home from his chess club last fall, his car having been stolen 2 weeks earlier, when suddenly...
Where goes my car? Out of the clear blue, it's my car. And I'm in shock.
Bogdan hailed another cab and took off in pursuit.
Follow that cab.
In spite of the taxi decals and a new sign on the roof, Bogdan felt certain he was following his stolen car. After a few blocks, it pulled over to the curb. Quickly, he ran up and stepped inside. It looked like a taxi, but he was convinced it was his car.
Downtown. I looked at the glove compartment, and that seemed to be like my car. I played with the windows, and I noticed the sunroof down. And I said to myself, this has to be my car.
How you doing?
Finally, as they passed a policeman on the sidewalk, Satella knew it was time to act.
What is your problem, man? What is wrong with you? Hey, give me back my keys, man.
I'll say, what's going on? You guys stole my car, sir.
What is wrong with you, man?
You stole your taxi?
Yeah, here's the
registration.
registration card. And the cop looks at me strange. You know, he's like, what are you talking about, buddy? How do you know it's your car? This is my car, officer.
You made a stolen vehicle?
He checked the vehicle identification number, and that didn't match the owner registration card that I showed him.
Jive, it appears to be his car.
Sir, I told him, I was thinking, hey, the vehicle identification number has been changed.
How do you know this?
Then I thought to myself, I have to convince him that this is definitely my car. And I said, officer, how about if we pop the trunk open you know, because I had some chess sets in there, you know, and some other things. Why don't you just pop the trunk open, you know, perhaps just see if something's there.
It was a long shot, but it was Satella's last chance to prove it was, in fact, his car. The policeman popped open the trunk, and lo and behold, checkmate. Satella got his car back, and the cab driver was booked for grand theft auto.
Do you think you could survive a 1,400-mile trip with little or no oxygen at 40 degrees below zero? Well, let me tell you about an accidental tourist who faced just those odds. Meet Bobby, who for all of his 2 years had lived in the tiny town of New Caney, Texas. One day last winter, Bobby decided it was time to see the world. Bobby hit the road, wandering 30 miles, all the way from New Caney to the Houston Intercontinental Airport. For Bobby, it was a chance to hitch a ride to New York, so he climbed right into the wheel well of a Boeing 727, about to take off for the Big Apple. Not a wise choice. At 31,000 feet, there is almost no oxygen inside the wheel well, and the temperature drops to 40 degrees below zero. Bobby was likely to use up all of his 9 lives. After a bone-chilling 3 hours, Bobby and the plane touched down at Kennedy International Airport, and the maintenance crew made a surprising discovery.
Hickman, come here! Look at that.
I looked up and I thought I saw a very large dead raccoon. Ooh. So I used a butt end of a flashlight and gently prodded it to see what was in there.
Bobby was freezing cold, near death, but incredibly hanging on to life.
Here's the oxygen, Hickman.
A crewman grabbed an emergency oxygen bottle, cut the mask down to size, and gave Bobby pure oxygen to try and bring him around.
He's taking it. It's gonna be all right, kitty.
After 20 minutes, it looked like Bobby was going to pull through.
You're gonna make it, Hickman.
Yeah. It was like sheer and utter amazement. I really didn't think he'd make the grade. It's just totally amazing that he did.
Bobby's owner was located by the tag on his collar, and in a few hours he was on the next flight back to Houston. This time he was invited up into the cockpit, where he was treated to a first-class meal. And on the menu that night, poached salmon. We'll be right back. Unexpected events can have a profound impact on the way we live our lives. How we choose to respond in the face of adversity tells a lot about who we are.
Tonight we've seen how a few ordinary people have succeeded in conquering overwhelming odds. Their unique accomplishments are an inspiration to all of us.
Good night.
Good night.
Have you or someone you know beaten the odds in an unusual way? We'd like to hear from you. If you have a story or know someone who has beaten the odds, send us a description of who was involved, what happened, where it happened, and when it happened. Make sure to include your name, address, and phone number. Mail your story to Against All Odds, Post Office Box 10729, Burbank, California 91510. That's Against All Odds, Post Office Box 10729, Burbank, California 91510.